Hello and welcome to tutorial number 3 in the Cinema 4D Basics series. And in this tutorial we will be covering primitive shapes, the Boolean tool and some basic lighting, just to give you a little bit of grip with the lighting. I won't be doing HDRI lighting, it's just the spotlights that are built into Cinema 4D. So let's have a little look and see what we can see. So, firstly, you've got your basic primitive shapes. Let's tear this off like we described in the last one. We have our selection of basics. These are all very, very useful. But I tend to approach this in a kind of in a simple enough way. I mean, there's loads of ways you can model in Cinema 4D. There's not just one. Obviously, the big one is the subdivision surface modeling, which I won't be covering in this. But if you need to do some basic stuff, just if you wanted, say, I don't know, like a staircase or something like that, yeah. And so you can obviously move your cube around with the grab handles that are baked into Cinema 4D. You got your X, Y, and Z axes there, and then you've got your other ones, your other basic shapes. And you can just kind of, depending on your needs, you can manipulate at will. So the interesting thing about these is, although they're basic, I tend to use them quite a lot. If you want to change the size of them, there's this little yellow dot there you can drag. And that will help you really quickly change the shape of stuff around. And it's just a really handy little way of modeling quickly. Now, I'm obviously using keyboard shortcuts to navigate the viewport here. That was covered in the first tutorial. So if you're wondering about that, why I'm not clicking up here, feel free to go and look at that and master your viewport skills. But for this one, we're covering the basic, the primitive shapes. So here we've got our cube, our sphere. We can do all sorts of things. Cone. Let's go for the classic, the cube, the sphere, and the cone. So yeah, you can kind of change your cone radius, your height, everything there. Was there another? That looks like the old Electronics Arts logo, doesn't it? Sort of ish. But yeah, So there's your primitive shapes. You want to stick a hat on someone, you could do that. But where these get quite powerful, and it's kind of like, it's not frowned upon, but some people don't consider it best practice. But I mean, for goodness sake, Cinema 4D is built around kind of procedural modeling or parametric modeling. I can't remember which. But it's kind of like the whole point of Cinema 4D's modeling system is it's non-destructive. It has a brilliant modeling system built in with the subdivision surface modeling, but if you want to do stuff that's you don't need that. Sometimes I just want to have some shapes and just decorate stuff. But one of the most powerful things about Cinema 4D is this. It's got it's what's called a Boolean. Now, if I go into my startup layout, I've got everything customized, you see. So everything here is at my fingertips. If you want, I could probably, if you want to leave a comment down below, I can always update the description with a Dropbox link to a startup file that's saved, and you can just have this layout. This is a bit closer to the layout I kind of grew up with almost in Cinema 4D, but the Boolean tool is one we can look at. So we create a bool. This is a bool object, okay? And you need 2 objects to go inside the bool object. And so for the purposes of this experiment, let's just delete this. And we'll have our sphere and our cube. So you can see the cube's disappeared. However, if we drag this across, we can see now the cube is now cutting into the sphere. And a Boolean is a classic algebra term for basically this. Well, this is a visualization of it. So you can see where the power comes from the primitives and the bool. You see, you can kind of, if you need, and then obviously how the bool works is you have your object, your order of objects within that, and then you have your Boolean type. So A subtract B. So that's obviously sphere subtracting cube. So there you go. So this is obviously going to be A and this is going to be B. If we want to change that, we can have A union B, and that will just create an object. You can create a single object here, and that kind of messes the geometry up a bit. You have to be careful with the bool. It can create some really messy geometry. Referring back to previous tutorials, let's look at the geometry here. You can see that the single object, when it's kind of combining them, yeah, I mean you can get some gnarly geometry. It's not the kind of thing that, you know, if you're obsessed with clean geometry, you shouldn't really bother. Well, I'm a 3D illustrator. I'm not too bothered about it being dead clean. I just want the results that I want, and so it works pretty well for me. I once got described as a gunslinger by a senior 3D artist, and he wasn't wrong, to be fair. So yeah, let's see what happens. So you can just, you know, that'll kind of absorb it as well. So yeah, so let's go back into the bool and we'll go intersect. And so we have this now, which is, you can see you creating an intersection. So, you know, if you want to, you know, I remember a classic one in Amiga format way back in the day where they were making a dice and they just showed you how to use, because the bool's been around for ages. It's been like, you know, back in the 90s when I was like kind of sneaking into my uncle's PC to go on, I think it was Lightwave or some other one of those really old ones. But yeah, it came with on a copy on the cover of a magazine. There was a disc and had a 3D program on it. So I kind of, whenever he'd go out, I'd go in there and play on his computer without him knowing. Yeah. So thanks for that, Dermot. Sound. But yeah, no, this is all how it works, and you can see this is the power of the Boolean. And you know, if you were to obviously fillet the cube, it will still chop the edges off. But it doesn't fillet the actual Boolean edges itself, so that's something to watch out for. And this is by no means a magic bullet. However, it does come into its own when we explore the volume builder in the next tutorial, so hold out for that. But for now, we're just going to experiment with Booleans. You can see that, I mean, the geometry is like, oh god, I mean, it's disgusting. You know, it's like, look at the state of that. It's horrid. Yeah, it was all over the place. But it's not, you know, you might highlight it in the phone tag. This is the phone tag, by the way. That kind of, oh, let me just show you. So let's just turn that off. If we delete the phone tag, right, let's get rid of the geometry mode, and we'll see this, right. If I delete the phone tag, that's what happens. And if you're actually modeling for 3D printing, you do have to delete the phone tag to get an accurate representation of what you will be actually producing in the 3D printer. But that, I mean, I can do a tutorial in 3D printing if you want, but do let me know in the comments. But yeah, so that's what happens. That's why you have a Phong tag. Phong is like a type of shading that kind of masks the rigid surfaces, flat surfaces of 3D objects. So yeah, so this is where we're at with the bool. Turn this back on, turn that back on. You can see, you know, you can, yeah, it's kind of cool. Like, what it kind of reminds me of, like, is like, you know, if there was like, say, a 4-dimensional object passing through our 3-dimensional space. For instance, if you were to sort of see like a you know, something appearing out of nowhere and then disappearing again, you know, that's kind of what it reminds me of. You know, it's, for instance, if, like, say, if you passed a basketball through a 2-dimensional universe, the 2-dimensional entities, were they able to visualize or see it, they would see just a disc getting bigger and bigger and bigger and smaller and smaller and smaller, and then it'd be gone. But that would have actually been a cube or like a sphere passing through their space. So yeah, anyway, that's kind of like, you know, the power of this. And also, if you combine objects together to make a single object, if you wanted to make a weird shape, you can do that, which I've already mentioned. But I think it's important to kind of reiterate. You want to just, ideally, you know, you can re-add the Phong tag. It's in here. It's in there somewhere. I'm not going to hunt around for it now because there isn't. I don't want to waste time. But you know, you can just, you know, look for it. It's, you know, it's definitely in there. So yeah, and then, you know, obviously, if you wanted to increase the number of segments in the sphere, you can have that. Increase the number of fillet. So subdivisions on that, you know, it's all groovy. It's all pretty groovy, and you can increase the fillet radius as well, but you can also do that with this little grab handle here for your cube. The idea of when you're doing a 3D model, you really don't want to have too many hard edges, because you want a bit of fillet to kind of pick up the light. That's the idea of it. So, you know, if it's like, even if that was a dead, you know, a machine cut cube, you would never ever get a perfect sharp edge. Sometimes I do it, and if I can get away with it, I will. You know, it's all about time is money, and my clients are paying me by the hour. So, you know, if I find the quality is acceptable without having to fillet a surface or bevel it, then I'll do it. You know, but if it's not acceptable, then it has to be done. So then that's where we're at with this. So yeah, and obviously the other Boolean settings are A without B. You can see here where it's kind of like it's not retained the face of the sphere. It's literally just cut it out completely. So when you subtract it, you retain the face of the B object, A subtract B. But obviously without is completely without. That's the point of having two different settings for that. And then obviously you have your intersection where you'd have that there. But oddly, there's no option to kind of intersect and not see the face of the cube, which I find curious. But, you know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is somewhere that you can do that, or some setting. Please feel free to correct me in the comments. And so yeah, and that's how we roll with Booleans and primitives. And obviously there's a load of primitives there for you to play with. Yeah, feel free to get stuck in and just play around with them. And when you're doing that as well, okay, a couple of things to remember, or that you can remember, these are handy that I always use. If you right click, yeah, and you open this contextual menu here, you can have a thing called either make editable, current state object, connect objects plus delete. That's one I use quite a lot actually. You make editable one is just, you know, you've got your two objects there, and then the bool is just a null object now, so there's no more bool. It's just that. So if we turn that off in these little traffic light menu thing here, you can do this with any thing in Cinema 4D. So it's got this traffic light menu. It lets you turn things on and off, and also like the point of having a green and a red, yeah. If that's turned off, I can still turn on objects that are nested within it by clicking on the green, and if that's red, it turns them off. If it's neutral, it defaults to the parent object setting, but you can override the parent object setting by these little green traffic lights. So they're ever so useful. And the reason there's two is that the top one is addressing the viewport view, and the bottom one is addressing the render view. So if you want to see something in the preview and you don't want it in the render for whatever reason, you can do that. So let's try it out. So if I turn this on in the preview view and this in the render view, if I do a quick render, if you hit Option or, that will give you your preview render window, which is adjustable. I need to just turn off global illumination and ambient occlusion for this one, because otherwise you won't be able to see the actual things rendered. So you see here, the cube and the sphere are inside the Boolean, but you can't see the Boolean there. So if I do that, you'll see nothing apart from the ones that I've overridden. So if I override the sphere again, it'll render. Oh, sorry, you'll see it in the viewport, but then if I do it in the render view, it'll render. So, you know, these little traffic lights are a really important thing to understand. They're really handy, and you'd be surprised the amount of times you actually use them. I can't even think of an example off the top of my head now, but trust me. And so the next thing that we will cover is, so we've made a current state to object out of this. Let's just undo the settings on here, and let's see, obviously that's Boolean, so that's all cut. We will, I wonder if I've got enough undos left. If not, I'll have to make a new object. Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, so Command Z to undo, Command Y to redo, unlike other applications you may have used. So yeah, and the other options are make editable current state to object, connect objects, which you just connect them in a new one, and you need, so if you deleted this one, and that'll connect them for you. Depending on your Boolean settings, you might want to have high quality. You need to check high quality to enable create single object. And once you create a single object, that will affect how you, so if I just press C on that one, you see now it just creates cube plus sphere. Whereas if I was to not have a single object and I did that, it would be still give me two objects. So that's important to remember as well when you're Booleaning stuff. So yeah, I think that kind of covers the basics of the primitive shapes and the Boolean object. The reason I've included the Boolean object with the primitive shape tutorial is that I think it's kind of, you tend to use it with primitives more. Especially if you're doing stuff for 3D printing. I use it a lot. When I was making a part for my friend's model Spitfire plane, and I Booleaned out some shapes. The 3D printer doesn't care what your geometry is, if it's clean or not. It just does it. So that was cool, and that turned out pretty well anyway. And so the next thing we'll cover as well, I have disabled global illumination, but I'll come back to that in another tutorial. We're going to add some lights, just have a little look around in some lights. So what I normally do in my light settings, we have a few options. If you create this light, you can turn it into a spotlight. If you create this light, you can turn it into a target light. So these are just kind of presets, but they're all more or less the same thing, but just with different settings. So we start a standard light, yeah. So there's your light, and it's all made everything dark now because the light's gone inside the thing. So if we go here, I'll just zoom out a bit. Not using your keyboard shortcuts now, Ollie, are you? No. So yeah, there's your light, and it's just lighting up your scene nicely. So the next thing you want is maybe, if this light's kind of, it's an omnidirectional light. So we'll go into our light settings in here. Under general, you'll have omni. So there's a few ones, like again, these are all the same as presets you got up here, but if you have one already and you just want to change it rather than creating a whole new light, you can have your spotlight, and that'll give you, if I press the OR to rotate on the keyboard, and that's obviously this one here, you can see this will give you your light. You can adjust the settings of the light on the fly, just by, you can zoom in and out of the light. That's actually important if you're using volumetric lighting, but I'm not going to cover that now. But yeah, that'll give you, if you have visible light, like when you get light that's it's got this kind of visibility, like a beam coming off in the nighttime, and you shine a torch into the sky and you can kind of see the torch beam, and that'll give you that effect, and then you can widen it or shorten it. But and obviously that does affect how the light's cast as well. And so yeah, that's a useful thing. But if you wanted to say, if you select a target light, you can go in here. And there is a target tag under animation, so you can put the target tag on the light, and then click on the tag, and this will give you the option here to put your target object in. So you just drag in whatever you want. I'll drag in the bool, and you see the lights now going to track the Boolean object. That's very useful if you've got a kind of a setup and you've moved your object, but you don't want to keep adjusting your lights manually. It's very, very handy. Then obviously you got your various other lighting types where you might have a infinite light, which is kind of like it's a bit like a sunlight, it's just like a vast thing. So that's pretty cool. You can kind of control that too. And then you'll have your area light, which is kind of like just a load of little spotlights put together, and that gives you kind of more of a flat lighting thing, so kind of a bit more neutral. And then you have your, I won't go into these ones because they're I'll do a little bit, but you get the idea. There's options. Obviously you can turn shadows on and off. Let me create a floor. I'm just going to use a plane instead of the actual floor object. Let me just line that up with that. So now if we enable shadows, we'll have, say, shadow maps. So if I quickly render that, let me just render it without first. So there's your one with just the light and the objects. Now, if we go for shadow maps, we'll get soft shadows. If we go for ray traced, you get hard shadows. There's a difference, but it's not too bad. Just soft and hard shadows. The area shadows tend to be a little bit in between. That's your area. Like it's kind of like a shadow you get from an area light, but you're using them from a spotlight. So yeah, that's all very, very cool stuff. So when it comes to like visible light, you can have visible light, which will give you your, you see what I was saying earlier on about like the torch beam type thing. So then if you wanted to really narrow that, you could, if you wanted to create something with like spotlights, or you needed to make a spaceship with some lights coming out, that might be useful for that, The volumetric is similar to visible. It's actually pretty much the same, but there are subtle differences. And in practice, you might want to switch between the two. Inverse volumetric, I'm not sure what the point of that is. I'm sure there is one, but yeah, I mean, it is what it is. So yeah, and there's all your cool light settings. So this is kind of like, I used to use these a lot. I've moved to kind of more HDRI lighting nowadays, just for a bit more of an ambient feel. But there is a place for this type of lighting. And as you explore on your 3D journey, you might find, depending on if you're working with a certain art director, or you just be doing your own art direction, you want a certain look and feel. And you can combine these with HDRI as well, but we'll get into that in another one. So yeah, pretty much all your settings here. I tend to just leave these alone. You can turn off the visible lighting and redo much, but there's if you want to have the no illumination for some reason, just not, you can have that. I don't see why. And then you've got your intensity of the light. You can change your light color. And you can have lots of fun with shapes and lights here in Cinema 4D. So I think that's about everything. We've covered primitives, Booleans, and basic lighting. And so I think that'll do us for now. We want to keep this digestible and in bite-sized chunks. I don't want to overload anyone in a single video. There's a series of this, so it's all good. So thank you very much. And if you've made it this far, well done. And I hope this has given you great value, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to share my knowledge. So all the best.